On the night of June 27, Chris Paul was hanging at One Oak in West Hollywood with LeBron James. The club thumped as Paul and LeBron exchanged greetings with Tristan Thompson and Joe Johnson, who dined with his wife at a nearby booth. When the clock struck 1 a.m. and they began plotting their exit from the private entrance ahead of the paparazzi, Paul noticed a text from his agent, Leon Rose. The trade to Houston had been consummated through a series of complex transactions, including the acquisitions of Darren Hilliard from Detroit and DeAndre Liggins from Dallas, then flipping them to the Clippers as part of a package for Paul. The Rockets had swapped Patrick Beverley, Lou Williams, Sam Dekker, Montrezl Harrell, Kyle Wiltshire and a future first-round pick for their All-Star. Paul was about to alter the power structure of the NBA. He was also about to take aim at the very player sitting next to him. LeBron's my man, but he didn't know, Paul says now. I didn't tell you him initially because even though we're so close, we're also ultra-competitive. 20 minutes later, Paul finally revealed his secret. LeBron's response: he ordered shots of Don Julio 1942 tequila and clinked glasses with his friend. Be happy, LeBron said. It was a genuine sentiment, yet one easier dispensed by a superstar in the Eastern Conference. Both James and Paul knew, even as the deal went down, that Golden State remained the title favorite. After the trade was announced, Houston's title odds rose from 301 to 151. The Warriors remained at 511. Still, Maury wasn't interested in Vegas numbers. He had his own data to suggest that Paul would be a game-changer, particularly in taking pressure off Harden. According to ESPN stats information, when Harden's usage rate increased by 10%, his defensive effectiveness declined by 12%. Paul, meanwhile, had posted 4 of the top 100 seasons all-time in defensive win shares among guards. 3 hours later, at 4 a.m., when Maury FaceTimed his new guard at Paul's California home, he discovered his newest acquisition clutching the bobblehead. See, Paul smiled, waving it at Maury. It's fate. To Harden, it looked like a weapon to fight the Warriors. When Maury next called him, at 4:15 a.m., Harden emitted a little happy noise, then immediately asked his GM, "Who we getting next?" Maury, "What, been up all night?" Shot back, "Can we just pause 1 second to celebrate the Hall of Famer we just got?" Indeed, Houston now boasted 2 singular talents with high basketball IQs, both motivated by unfulfilled goals. Both had also procured reputations as stubborn, ball-dominant and edgy, often difficult leaders. Paul chose Mastro's restaurant in Los Angeles to celebrate his Rockets union with Rockets CEO Tad Brown, D'Antoni and team owner Leslie Alexander. The dinner conversation centered on communication, with Paul expressing a desire to know as much as possible about the team's blueprint. It was clear, Brown says, Chris was a guy who wanted to be part of the process. As the Rockets' brain trust noshed on steak and pasta, Paul called Redick and joked with him about the great tax breaks in Texas. In 2013, the last time CP3's contract was up, Daryl Morey presented him with a custom-designed Chris Paul and Little Chris bobblehead. Years later, CP3 still has the bobblehead. Courtesy Houston Rockets. On a warm September morning in Houston, D'Antoni observes his new 2-headed point guard monster from the club seats of an otherwise empty Toyota Center. Some of his players, including Paul and Harden, have gathered for their daily scrimmage, and their coach is focused on one thing in particular: who takes the ball out after a basket. D'Antoni abhors the notion of having to designate one player for this assignment. Within minutes, it becomes apparent this won't be necessary. When a three-point bomb by Ariza drops through, Paul instinctively retrieves the ball and fires it to Harden on the left side of the floor. Next time down, when Ariza scores again, it's Harden who is nearest to the basket, so he plucks the ball out of the strings and fires it 20 feet up court to his new running mate. The ball zips up the floor as the 2 point guards feed off each other. There's Paul lofting a lob to Clint Capella for a slam. There's Paul again, as Harden fills the lane on the wing, the ball falling into Harden's hands. It's unbelievable, Harden will say later. I don't have to dribble. I can shoot it. Right now. Because I'm wide open. Catch and shoot. I haven't done it in 5 years. Roland, who has trained Paul since his days in New Orleans, says he's never seen Paul happier. In addition to Harden, both Ariza and Bobby Brown, who played with CP3 in New Orleans, have been constant companions since his arrival. A bunch of us went to dinner the other night and talked about the AAU feel this team has, Paul says. A bunch of guys who love to be in the gym. "It's gonna work," says Harden, who says he's giddy from the notion of Paul as a finisher on the pick-and-roll, as a mid-range shooter, as a three-point threat. "Chris is starting to understand what I like and what I don't like. Same with me. So later this season, when we're yelling at each other on the court, it's not because I'm mad at him or don't like him, it's because we're having honest communication. Paul is certain he and Harden will make a great pair because we can help each other. But the rub is how they defer to each other. Case in point, Harden spent almost all of last season as the primary ball handler in transition for the Rockets. Paul has assumed that role for every team he's been on in his 12-year career. But Harden, quite simply, might be better at it. According to Houston's analytics staff, Harden led the league with 873 kick-ahead passes, those advanced 25 feet or more toward the basket. The Rockets scored 477 points directly on such passes, tops in the NBA. By comparison, LeBron was second in the league with 777 kick-ahead passes, John Wall third with 633, and no one else had over 500. Paul ranked 27th with 267. Harden also scored or assisted on 4,538 points last season, one shy of the NBA record. The presence of Paul will invariably mean fewer field goal attempts and less scoring. Still, Harden insists he won't get hung up on numbers, shots, or attention. None of that, he says. It's about winning. We've both dealt with the negatives, the frustration, the disappointment. We can't have anything leaking into our goals. Says Morey, if Chris has the ball in a key moment and we make the wrong decision, or James has the ball and it goes bad, that's no big deal if it happens once. If it happens a few times, I can see tension developing. So let's see how it goes. Can they share playmaking duties? Who will run the break? Who takes the last shot? Who is one? Who is one? A can two alpha males coexist with similar skill sets? Those answers, D'Antoni asserts, will make or break his new duo. Paul will need to learn to play faster, D'Antoni says. And Harden will need to remember HES alongside one of today's most gifted pick-and-roll maestros. Both will need to let go of their MVP aspirations. It's a matter of getting all the problems out front, D'Antoni says. Not resolving them, because you can't until they happen, but at least we're discussing them. So when things go south a little bit, you say, hey, remember we talked about this in September. What you hope they say is, oh, that's right. We're good. It's really up to James and Chris. When stuff comes up and it will, are we going to let it derail us, or are we going ahead with a plan? Morey continually conferenced Paul and Harden during the preseason on potential trades, including the Carmelo Anthony watch, the sale of the team, roster moves and offensive sets. We bring our players into the fold in a major way, to a point where some teams would claim we're making a major mistake, Morey says. Meanwhile, D'Antoni hauled Paul and Harden into his office and laid out the specifics of their workload. Paul will log 32 to 33 minutes and Harden 34 minutes a night. I will have a Hall of Fame point guard on the floor at all times, I promise you that, D'Antoni says. Paul will come out of the game after 5 minutes of the first quarter, earlier than at any other point in his career. Harden, who prefers to play the entire first quarter, will now have to take a seat with 2.5 or 3 minutes left. By D'Antoni's estimation, Paul and Harden will play 18 minutes together, including the final 5 of every game. That requires Harden to sit for the first 4 minutes of the final quarter. I already know there will be times when the game is close and James will be saying, "This is balls, I gotta be in there," D'Antoni says, laughing. And I'm gonna say, "I don't know what to tell you." We talked about this. James Harden was a college sophomore at Arizona State when O.J. Mayo, then a rookie with Memphis, invited him to meet some NBA luminaries who were in Phoenix for the 2009 All-Star Weekend. Mayo led him to a ballroom at the Four Seasons Hotel where the All-Stars were congregating. Harden stood in the back, wide-eyed, as he took inventory of the room. There were LeBron James and Dwayne Wade and Chris Paul, all engaged in a spirited round of the card game Bore. The trio cackled and heckled one another as they tossed $100 bills into the pot. Paul paused mid-hand to say hello to a startled Harden, who said little as the All-Star made basketball small talk with him. I remember watching LeBron and CP3 and Wade interacting and thinking, wow, so this is how it's supposed to be, Harden says. But then you get into the league and you realize how precious that is. It's unbelievable. I don't have to dribble. I can catch and shoot. I haven't done it in 5 years. James Harden, on playing with CP3 today, as Paul leaves a franchise and relationships in his wake, HES hoping, like every new kid in town, that a change of locale might yield new BFFs. Harden, for his part, says he regrets not getting to know Dwight Howard better while the big man was in Houston and vows not to repeat that mistake with Paul. The two have spent the summer bowling, eating, balling and taking in a Kendrick Lamar concert. Clippers coach Doc Rivers, meanwhile, is watching Paul's immersion into the Rockets with interest. He admits their relationship suffered at the bitter end. In early September, Rivers is sitting courtside at the TD Garden in Boston, where he returns annually to attend a charity event, and he says the disconnect between Paul and some of his Clippers teammates stemmed from accountability. "I thought when Chris rubbed guys the worst was when he messed up," Rivers says, "because when you mess up, you gotta take it. I didn't really think he did. But overall, HES a damn smart point guard, and you never have a problem coaching that." Some 1,850 miles away and 3 weeks later, Paul has just come down from the roof of the Toyota Center. Up there, he has just posed for photos alongside Harden, an HES buoyant until the topic turns to the Clippers. His smile fades, his brow furrows and he rubs his temples as Rivers' comments are relayed to him. "Let Doc be Doc," he says, trailing off. "I'm sure I'm a tough leader," Paul finally says. "But if I'm so bad to play with, then how come Luke and JJ wanted to be here with me?" says Redick. "Is Chris tough to play with? Yes, in the sense that there's an edge to the way he plays, and if you have a different personality, it can grind at you a little bit. I always liked it." Back at the Garden in Boston, Rivers says that as far back as the start of last season he felt it was 5050 whether Paul would leave. Paul, in Houston, vehemently denies this. "I was Allen with the Clippers," he insists. Rivers says the reason Paul has moved on is that he believes he can go deeper in the playoffs with Houston than if he'd stayed with the Clippers, which Rivers disputes. "Chris earned the right to be a free agent," Rivers says. "But the grass isn't always greener. We tell players that all the time. They'll find out." Paul, on a bench outside the Toyota Center, considers Rivers' stance, then purses his lips as though HES just sipped a glass of spoiled milk. He tugs at his Rockets uniform and glances to his left, where Harden is sporting the same jersey an arm's length away. "Doc is exactly right," Paul says, his jaw set firmly. "You can hope the grass is greener, and it may not be. But I'm going to walk around the corner and see." Jackie MacMullen is an ESPN analyst who spent nearly 20 years as a beat writer and columnist for the Boston Globe. MacMullen was recently named the first female recipient of the Kurt Gowdy Media Award, given by the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame for outstanding career achievement in writing basketball.